People who reconnected with their high school bully, how did they turn out? I drove back to my childhood home for the first time in 8 years and pulled into the driveway where my father would never again wave from the porch. Somehow, the house looked better than it had in decades. And that's when I saw him through the kitchen window, standing next to my grieving mother with his arm around her shoulders like he belonged there. It was my high school bully, Christopher. He was in my kitchen making my mother laugh while she cooked dinner. My stomach dropped as memories flooded back of lockers slammed shut on my fingers and hallways where I'd learned to walk with my head down. I sat in my car for 10 minutes trying to process what I was seeing before finally walking to the front door. Mom opened it before I could knock, and her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since before Dad died 3 months ago. She looked healthier somehow and was wearing actual makeup instead of the pajamas she'd been living in during our video calls. Christopher appeared behind her, wiping his hands on a dish towel like he lived there. He smiled at me and extended his hand. "I'm Christopher, but everyone calls me Chris. You must be Danny. Your mom talks about you all the time." His grip was firm and confident, and I felt 17 again standing there in my own doorway. Mom ushered us inside, chattering about how wonderful Chris had been helping with everything from grocery shopping to fixing the leaky faucet Dad never got around to. She kept touching his arm when she talked about him and looking at him like he'd saved her life. During dinner, Chris asked about my graphic design work in Portland and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. He mentioned staying local after graduation and how he'd always believed in taking care of family and community. Mom nodded along enthusiastically, and I caught her glancing between us like she was comparing. Chris helped clear the table without being asked and knew exactly where everything went in the kitchen. He had his own coffee mug with his name on it, and there were photos of him with Mom on the refrigerator that looked like they'd been taken over several weeks. When Mom went to get dessert, Chris leaned back in his chair and said, "Funny how life works out, isn't it? Small towns have a way of bringing people back together when they need each other most." I asked how long he'd been helping Mom, and he said he'd started coming around right after the funeral when he heard she was struggling. He just wanted to check on her since he remembered how kind she'd always been to everyone at school. The way he said it made it sound like a beautiful coincidence, but something felt calculated about his timing. After dessert, Chris mentioned he should head home, but Mom insisted he stay for coffee. She seemed almost panicked at the thought of him leaving, and I realized she'd grown dependent on his presence in a way that went beyond simple gratitude. Chris just smiled, that same predatory smile I remembered from high school hallways. When he finally left, Mom walked him to the door and hugged him goodbye. She came back inside glowing and immediately started praising him, saying, "He's been such a blessing, Danny. I don't know what I would have done without him these past few months. He's so mature and responsible, and he never makes me feel like a burden the way some people do." The emphasis on some people hit like a physical blow. I tried to explain that I'd been dealing with Dad's death too, and that my job required me to be in Portland, but Mom just shook her head. That night, I was laying on the couch, since Chris had converted my old bedroom into what Mom called his workshop. I could hear Mom on the phone with someone, talking about how worried she was about me, and how grateful she was to have Chris's support during this difficult time with my adjustment issues. The next morning, Chris showed up at 7 with coffee and pastries from Mom's favorite bakery. He knew her order by heart. Over breakfast, he mentioned projects he was planning for the house, and spoke about the future like he'd be part of it permanently. Mom hung on his every word and agreed to everything he suggested. When I tried to join the conversation, Chris would redirect to something I couldn't contribute to, like local politics or people from high school I'd never kept in touch with. He had a way of making me feel like an outsider in my own family home. Later that day, while Mom was at the grocery store, Chris cornered me in the garage. He dropped his friendly mask completely and looked at me with those same cold eyes from senior year. He said, "It's amazing how easy it was to become everything you never were to her, Danny. She needed a son who actually cared enough to stick around, and the only son who deserves her inheritance." Then Mom's car pulled up, and his warm smile returned instantly as he went to help her with the groceries. That evening, Mom announced she was updating her will to include Chris, because family isn't just blood, it's who shows up for you. She looked directly at me when she said it, and I realized Chris had been positioning himself as my replacement from the moment he'd learned Dad died. Full story on channel, linked below.